This lesson is about spatial exclusion and development of 45 suburbs. By the end of the lesson, I want you to be able to understand what the characteristics of spatial exclusion are, and to give some examples. So let's have a look at what spatial exclusion is all about. This comes straight from the Border Studies syllabus, and spatial exclusion refers to the defence of luxury lifestyles which have resulted in restrictions in spatial access and the freedom of movement of other urban dwellers. It is manifest in high security suburbs or estates and security conscious retail business complexes. What does that look like in real life? Well, here's a very extreme example of what a gated community is. This is not in Australia, but in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, one of the favelas. On the left hand side you can see quite clearly that we've got slum conditions, and to the right we've got very affluent housing. What separates them is this big wall. This is what we mean by spatial exclusion. There are far more people living in the left hand side of the picture than in the right. However, there is a big wall of separation, not just physically but also socially, because these two types of people would never ever mix. So this is what spatial exclusion is all about. We're talking about gated communities. This is quite a common theme, not just in Australia but around the world, especially in the USA, South Africa and the UK. And this is a good example of other forms of spatial exclusion. It's not just gated communities, but also infrastructure that only elite people use. Obviously, we've got a picture here of the Olympic Village in Sydney. The whole idea of a city hosting the Olympics is giving something back to the community. Does everyone use the facilities? Sydney was one of the few Olympics where most of the stadiums were shared and used after the Olympics. But again, people could argue that it could have been used more, especially when they're thinking of redeveloping some of the stadiums, particularly around Sydney. So spatial exclusion is the desire of the urban elite, and that means very, very rich people who live in the city, to protect their lifestyles and by limiting the space and freedom of other people. Gated wall communities are communities which only are accessible to certain people and can range from a resort-style golf course to townhouse complexes. Currently about 100,000 people in Australia live there, and 60 million people live in gated communities. So quite a big number of people. Here are some examples: Stone Creek Ranch in USA, Macquarie Links in Sydney, Jackson's Landing also again in Sydney, Girrawin Mews in Wagga, and Waterview Apartments. So there's some examples of gated communities, and that's an explanation of what spatial exclusion is.